Hey guys, welcome back to another Atlas Archives journey, where tonight we're venturing into Jordan, a kingdom that somehow managed to pack more history per square kilometre than seems physically possible. This crossroads between continents has witnessed everything from Nabataean merchants carving cities from rose-red cliffs to modern diplomats navigating some of the world's most complex politics, all while hosting more refugees per capita than almost anywhere on Earth. We'll drift through 12,000 years of human stories, from the world's oldest bread ovens to floating effortlessly in the Dead Sea, exploring how this small nation became the ultimate example of punching above your weight class in international affairs. Think Switzerland, but with more camels and considerably better archaeological sites. Tonight's exploration spans 6 fascinating chapters of Jordanian life, so whether you're winding down in Tokyo or just starting your evening in Toronto, you're in for quite the adventure. If you find yourself getting lost in these stories, and trust me, Petra alone could keep us talking until sunrise, hit that subscribe button and join our community of fellow history lovers. Because honestly, there are 91 more countries waiting for us, and some of them have even more dramatic plot twists than Jordan. Hard to believe, I know. So grab your favourite nighttime beverage, settle into something comfortable, and let's begin our journey through the remarkable tale of Jordan. Chapter 1. Ancient Foundations and Biblical Connections. Picture yourself standing in the soft morning light filtering through ancient sandstone, where the whispers of civilization stretch back hundreds of thousands of years. This is Jordan, a land where prehistoric hunters once roamed, where biblical kings built mighty fortresses, and where some of the most significant moments in human spiritual history unfolded. It's a place that somehow managed to be both incredibly important and mysteriously overlooked, rather like that friend who's always at the interesting parties but never quite makes it into the group photos. Let's begin our story in the mists of prehistory, when Jordan was home to some of humanity's earliest adventures in organized living. The Jordanian desert has yielded flint tools scattered across the landscape like ancient breadcrumbs, telling us that early humans found this region quite hospitable. With the Jordan River providing precious water and varied landscapes offering everything from desert hunting grounds to fertile valleys, it was practically a prehistoric paradise. One of the most remarkable discoveries came in 2017, when archaeologists working at Shubaika uncovered the oldest bread ever found, a charred, 14,000-year-old loaf that predates agriculture by several millennia. Our ancestors were apparently baking bread before they had figured out how to grow grain systematically. It's rather like inventing the oven before discovering flour, but somehow it worked. Speaking of the agricultural revolution, Jordan played a starring role in this transformative period between 12,000 and 3,500 BCE. Sites like Ain Ghazal, located in what is now metropolitan Amman, reveal settlements where people made the monumental shift from hunting and gathering to farming and staying put. Ain Ghazal is particularly fascinating because archaeologists have uncovered dozens of plaster statues dating to 7250 BCE, some of the oldest large-scale human representations ever found. These mysterious figures with their haunting hollow eyes and carefully modelled features suggest a complex society with sophisticated artistic and possibly religious practices. It's as if the ancient residents were saying, "We may have just figured out agriculture, but we're definitely ready for our close-up." As we move through the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age, Jordan becomes home to 3 kingdoms that would become legendary in biblical narrative: Amman, Moab, and Edom. These weren't just casual tribal groupings. They were sophisticated political entities that controlled lucrative trade routes and wielded considerable influence in the ancient world. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of strategic highway rest stops, except instead of overpriced coffee and questionable snacks, they offered protection, supplies, and passage through some of the world's most important commercial arteries. The kingdom of Amman occupied the northern regions of modern Jordan, with its capital at Rabbath Ammon. Yes, that's where Amman gets its name. According to biblical tradition, the Ammonites descended from Ben-Ami, the son of Lot and his younger daughter, a family story that definitely wouldn't make it into a modern greeting card. Despite their somewhat scandalous biblical origins, the Ammonites built a thriving kingdom that lasted for centuries. The Ammonites had what you might call a complicated relationship with their neighbours, particularly the Israelites. They were sometimes allies, sometimes enemies, and occasionally reluctant participants in larger regional conflicts. King David's general Joab led a siege against Rabbath Ammon that lasted so long it became the backdrop for the famous story of David and Bathsheba, proving that, even in ancient times, lengthy military campaigns could lead to some very poor decision-making. To the south of Ammon lay the kingdom of Moab, centered around the area east of the Dead Sea. The Moabites also traced their lineage to Lot through his son Moab, making them distant cousins to the Ammonites, though family reunions were probably rather tense affairs. The Moabites controlled crucial sections of the King's Highway, an ancient trade route that connected Arabia to Syria and was essentially the Interstate 40 of the Bronze and Iron Ages, minus the truck stops and billboards advertising dubious roadside attractions. One of the most significant archaeological discoveries related to Moab is the Mesha Stele, found in 1868 in the town of Deban. This 9th century BCE monument, also known as the Moabite Stone, provides a rare glimpse into ancient Middle Eastern politics from a non-Israelite perspective. King Mesha describes his successful rebellion against Israelite domination, mentioning several biblical figures including Omri, King of Israel. It's fascinating to have this ancient equivalent of a press release, where King Mesha essentially declares, "We've successfully broken free from those northern neighbours, and here's our side of the story, carved in stone for posterity." Perhaps the most famous biblical connection to Moab comes through the story of Ruth, the Moabite woman who became the great-grandmother of King David and an ancestor of Jesus. Ruth's decision to follow her Israelite mother-in-law Naomi back to Bethlehem, declaring, "Your people shall be my people, and your God my God," remains one of the most beautiful expressions of loyalty and faith in all of literature. The fact that a Moabite woman becomes central to the lineage of Israel's greatest king suggests a more complex relationship between these peoples than simple enmity. The southernmost of the three kingdoms was Edom, whose people descended from Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, later called Israel. The name Edom means red, referring to the distinctive red sandstone that characterizes much of their territory. The Edomites controlled the copper-rich regions stretching from the Dead Sea to the Red Sea, and their mining operations were sophisticated enough to supply copper for Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Recent archaeological work at Khirbat en Nahas has uncovered evidence of large-scale 10th century BCE copper smelting, with thousands of tons of slag indicating industrial-level production that required complex organization and considerable technical expertise. The Edomites also controlled one of antiquity's most spectacular cities, Salah, better known today as Petra. This remarkable site, with its elaborate rock-cut facades and sophisticated water management systems, would later become the capital of the Nabataean Kingdom, but it began as an Edomite stronghold. The biblical prophet Obadiah pronounced judgment against Edom's pride, saying, "Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down." Looking at Petra's towering cliffs and seemingly impregnable position, you can understand why the Edomites might have felt a bit invincible. But perhaps no people are more closely associated with Jordan than the Nabataeans, who emerged in the 4th century BCE and built one of antiquity's most successful trading empires. These Arabian nomads had an almost supernatural ability to find and preserve water in the desert, which made them invaluable guides and partners for merchants traversing the harsh landscapes between Arabia and the Mediterranean. Think of them as the ancient world's most exclusive travel agency, except their specialty was keeping you alive in places where water was more precious than gold. The Nabataeans established their capital at Petra around the 3rd century BCE, transforming the Edomite stronghold into a magnificent city that served as the hub of the incense trade. They controlled the flow of frankincense, myrrh, spices and silk from Arabia and India to the markets of Rome and the Mediterranean world. Their caravans were so reliable and their routes so well protected that merchants would pay premium prices for Nabataean guides and security. It was rather like having an ancient version of premium shipping, more expensive, but your goods actually arrived intact. What made the Nabataeans truly remarkable wasn't just their commercial success, but their cultural adaptability. They wrote in Aramaic but incorporated Greek architectural elements. They worshipped Arabian gods but adopted Hellenistic artistic styles. They were cultural chameleons with an eye for good business, which probably explains how they managed to stay independent for so long in a neighbourhood full of aggressive empires. The Nabataeans' relationship with water borders on the miraculous. In a region where rainfall is sparse and unpredictable, they developed sophisticated systems of channels, dams and cisterns that could capture and store every precious drop. Petra's water management system could supply an estimated 40 million litres of water daily, enough for a substantial urban population in one of the world's most arid environments. They didn't just survive in the desert, they created urban oases that could support thousands of residents, countless visitors, and the large animal caravans that were the backbone of ancient trade. Their architectural achievements at Petra remain some of the most spectacular examples of rock-cut architecture in the world. The famous treasury, with its intricate Hellenistic facade carved directly into rose-coloured sandstone, represents the pinnacle of Nabataean artistic achievement. But it wasn't just about show. Every element served practical purposes, from tombs positioned to catch dawn light to temples aligned with astronomical phenomena. The Nabataean kingdom reached its zenith during the reign of Aretas IV, who ruled from 9 BCE to 40 CE, making him a contemporary of Jesus. In fact, the Nabataeans play a small but significant role in New Testament history. The Apostle Paul mentions escaping from Damascus in a basket lowered from the city walls to avoid the governor appointed by Aretas IV. It's one of those wonderfully specific historical details that reminds us these weren't just ancient names in a book, but real people governing real places with real political complications. The Roman conquest of Nabataea in 106 CE under Emperor Trajan marked the end of Nabataean independence, but not their influence. The Romans were smart enough to recognize a good thing when they saw it, and they largely maintained the Nabataean commercial networks and administrative systems. Trajan rebuilt the Nabataean trade routes as Roman roads, including the famous Via Traiana Nova, which followed the ancient King's Highway. The Romans understood that conquest was only the first step. Successful rule required adapting to local conditions and working with existing systems rather than completely overturning them. Under Roman rule, Jordan became part of the province of Arabia Petraea. The Romans created the Decapolis, a league of 10 cities that included several Jordanian settlements: Philadelphia, Amman, Gerasa, Jerash, Gadara, Qais, Pella, and Capitolias. These cities enjoyed considerable autonomy and became showcases of Roman architecture and urban planning. Jerash became one of the finest examples of Roman provincial architecture in the East. The city was even honoured by a visit from Emperor Hadrian in 129 CE, for which the residents built a magnificent triumphal arch that still stands today. Walking through Jerash's ruins, you can almost hear the bustle of ancient street life, merchants hawking their wares, philosophers debating, and perhaps the occasional tourist from Rome complaining about the heat. As the Roman Empire gradually Christianized following Constantine's conversion in the 4th century, Jordan became an important center of early Christian life. Many of the region's most sacred Christian sites are found here, beginning with the spot where John the Baptist baptized Jesus. The exact location of this event has been debated, but the site known as Al-Maktaz, or Bethany beyond the Jordan, on the east bank of the Jordan River, has strong archaeological and historical support for being the authentic location. The significance of Jesus' baptism in Jordan cannot be overstated in Christian theology. This was the moment when Christ's public ministry began, when the Holy Spirit descended like a dove, and when God's voice was heard proclaiming Jesus as his beloved Son. For early Christians, the Jordan River became symbolic of spiritual rebirth and transformation, themes that would resonate throughout Christian history. The fact that this pivotal moment occurred in what is now Jordan gives the kingdom a special place in Christian sacred geography. Mount Nebo, located in western Jordan, provides another crucial biblical connection. This is where Moses stood to view the promised land that he would never enter, after leading the Israelites through 40 years of wilderness wandering. From Mount Nebo's summit, on a clear day, you can see Jerusalem, Jericho, and the Dead Sea, a panoramic view that encompasses much of the Holy Land. The site remains a place of pilgrimage for Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike, all of whom revere Moses as a great prophet and leader. As we conclude this first chapter of Jordan's story, we've seen a land that has been consistently significant throughout human history. Jordan has always been a place where different worlds meet and mingle, where trade routes converge, and where great events unfold. The next phase of our journey will take us through the dramatic centuries of the Crusades, Islamic empires, and Ottoman rule that would eventually give birth to the modern kingdom we know today. Rest well, knowing that tomorrow we'll continue exploring this remarkable crossroads of civilizations, where every stone seems to hold a story, and every landscape whispers of the countless generations who have called this extraordinary place home. Chapter 2: Crusades, Ayyubids, and Ottoman Rule. The year 636 CE marked a turning point that would echo through the centuries. At the Battle of Yarmouk, just north of modern Jordan, Muslim armies under the command of Khalid ibn al-Walid decisively defeated the Byzantine forces, ending nearly a millennium of Greco-Roman rule in the region. The Sword of Islam, as Khalid was known, had achieved something that seemed impossible just decades earlier: the conquest of an empire that had appeared unshakable. The Byzantines, already weakened by decades of devastating warfare with Sassanid Persia, simply couldn't withstand this new force that had emerged from the Arabian Peninsula with surprising speed and determination. Under the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphates, Jordan found itself at the heart of a rapidly expanding Islamic empire. The new rulers were remarkably pragmatic. Rather than destroying existing structures, they adapted and built upon them. The old Roman trade routes became Islamic highways. Byzantine administrative centres were transformed into Islamic government seats, and the Christian and Jewish populations found themselves living under a system that, while favouring Muslims, generally allowed them to practice their religions and conduct their business with minimal interference. The Umayyad period, beginning in 661 CE, when Damascus became the capital of the Islamic world, represents perhaps Jordan's most architecturally spectacular medieval era. The Umayyad caliphs had an interesting approach to governance. They maintained close connections with their Bedouin roots while simultaneously embracing the luxurious lifestyle that came with ruling a vast empire. This led to one of history's most fascinating architectural phenomena, the desert castles of Jordan. These weren't really castles in the European sense. Most had no military function whatsoever. Instead, they were elaborate country estates, hunting lodges and diplomatic meeting places scattered across the eastern desert. The Umayyads built these structures as retreats where caliphs could escape Damascus court life and reconnect with their desert heritage, while also serving as diplomatic venues for meetings with tribal leaders. The crown jewel of these desert establishments is Qusayr Amra, built by the future Caliph Walid II. This small but exquisite complex includes what may be the world's most surprising bathhouse. The interior walls and ceilings are covered with frescoes that would make a Roman emperor blush. Hunting scenes, bathing women, musicians, dancers, and even a remarkable astronomical ceiling showing zodiac constellations. It's rather like discovering that someone had built an 8th century Las Vegas in the middle of the Jordanian desert. These frescoes are unique in the Islamic world, representing a brief period when Umayyad rulers embraced figurative art with abandon. The paintings show clear influences from Byzantine, Persian, and classical traditions, demonstrating the cosmopolitan nature of early Islamic civilization. The fact that they survived at all is remarkable. Later Islamic dynasties generally prohibited such imagery, and many similar decorations elsewhere were destroyed or painted over. Qusayr Amra's remote location probably saved it from the attention of more puritanical rulers. Other notable Umayyad sites include Qasr al-Karana, an imposing two-story structure that looks like a fortress but was probably a diplomatic meeting place, and Qasr al-Mushata, which would have been the most magnificent of all the desert palaces had it ever been completed. The elaborate stone facade of Mushata, with its intricate carvings of animals and geometric patterns, now resides in a Berlin museum, a reminder of how archaeological treasures were sometimes collected by European museums during the colonial period. The Umayyad Golden Age in Jordan came to an abrupt end in 750 CE when the dynasty was overthrown by the Abbasids. Interestingly, the Abbasid revolution began in the Jordanian village of Humayma, where the future Abbasid caliphs had been quietly plotting their takeover for decades. When the Abbasids moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, Jordan suddenly found itself on the periphery rather than at the center of the Islamic world. Many of the desert palaces were abandoned, their elaborate decorations left to fade in the desert sun. Under Abbasid rule, Jordan experienced a period of relative decline. The focus of Islamic civilization had shifted eastward to Iraq, and the overland trade routes that had made Jordan prosperous were increasingly supplanted by maritime commerce. The region became more of a backwater, though it remained important as a way station for pilgrims travelling to Mecca. This period of reduced prominence would last for several centuries, until the arrival of new challenges and opportunities that would once again thrust Jordan into the spotlight of world events. Those challenges came in the form of the Crusades, beginning with the First Crusade's conquest of Jerusalem in 1099 CE. The Crusaders established the lordship of Ultra-Jordan, controlling much of Jordan through impressive fortifications. The most famous was Kerak Castle, stronghold of Reynold of Chatillon, a man whose name became synonymous with Crusader arrogance. Reynold broke truces, attacked Muslim pilgrims, and even threatened to march on Mecca itself, acts so inflammatory that they eventually provided Saladin the justification he needed to launch his final campaign against the Crusader states. The Crusaders also built Montreal Castle, now Shobak, Ajlaun Castle, to counter Muslim threats from the north, and numerous smaller fortifications. These weren't just military installations, they were centres of a feudal system that the Crusaders imported from Europe, complete with knights, serfs, and a complex hierarchy of obligations and loyalties. However, their hold on Jordan was always tenuous, dependent on maintaining good relations with local populations and keeping supply lines open to the coast. The end of Crusader rule in Jordan came with dramatic suddenness. In 1187, Saladin, Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, the Kurdish general who had united Muslim Syria and Egypt under his rule, decisively defeated the combined Crusader forces at the Battle of Hattin. The Crusader army was virtually annihilated, with most of its leadership either killed or captured. Among the prisoners was Raynald of Chatillon, whom Saladin personally executed, saying he had sworn to kill the man with his own hands for his repeated violations of truces and attacks on pilgrims. With the Crusader field army destroyed, their fortresses in Jordan fell like dominoes. Saladin's forces systematically captured the Crusader strongholds, often with minimal resistance since there were no longer enough Crusader troops to defend them effectively. The fall of Kerak Castle marked the end of nearly a century of Crusader rule in Transjordan, though the broader conflict between Crusaders and Muslims would continue for another century along the coast. Saladin founded the Ayyubid dynasty, which would rule Jordan until 1250 CE. The Ayyubids proved far more effective rulers than the Crusaders, largely because they understood the importance of working with local populations. They rebuilt fortifications, established new administrative centres, and made Jordan an important part of the pilgrimage infrastructure connecting Damascus to Mecca. Ajlan Castle was extensively rebuilt under Saladin's nephew, becoming a key fortress with signal fires that could carry messages from Damascus to Cairo in a single day, rather like an early medieval version of the internet, except involving burning things on mountaintops. However, the Ayyubid dynasty suffered from the same weakness that plagued many medieval Islamic states, the tendency to fragment along family lines after the death of a strong ruler. Following Saladin's death in 1193, his empire was divided among his sons and nephews, leading to decades of internal conflict that weakened the dynasty's ability to respond to external threats. By the mid-13th century, the Ayyubids were facing pressure from both the remaining Crusader states and a new, more formidable enemy, the Mamluks. The Mamluks, whose name literally means owned, were originally slave soldiers who eventually overthrew their Ayyubid masters and established their own dynasty in 1250 CE. Under Mamluk rule, Jordan continued to serve as a crucial link in the pilgrimage route to Mecca. The Mamluks were remarkably effective military administrators, improving existing fortifications and establishing a sophisticated communication system. They invested heavily in the Hajj pilgrimage infrastructure, building fortified stations along the route and providing military escorts to protect against Bedouin raids. The Mamluk period also saw significant economic development in Jordan. Agriculture flourished under their rule, particularly in areas like the Jordan Valley and around Ajloun, where the combination of adequate water supplies and Mamluk investment in irrigation systems created conditions for intensive farming. Trade also prospered, as the Mamluks maintained the traditional routes that connected Arabia with Syria and Egypt, while developing new commercial relationships with European merchants. However, like many medieval states, the Mamluk Sultanate eventually succumbed to a combination of internal decay and external pressure. By the early 16th century, the dynasty was weakened by succession struggles, economic problems, and the changing nature of warfare. The final blow came from an unexpected direction, the Ottoman Empire, which had been expanding steadily from its base in Anatolia, and was now ready to challenge the Mamluks for control of the eastern Mediterranean. In 1516, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I defeated the Mamluk army at the Battle of Majd-Dabik in northern Syria, effectively ending Mamluk rule. The following year, the Ottomans captured Cairo, and Jordan passed under Ottoman control, beginning a period of rule that would last for 4 centuries. The transition from Mamluk to Ottoman rule was relatively smooth in Jordan, partly because the Ottomans were wise enough to maintain many existing administrative and military arrangements rather than imposing completely new systems. Ottoman rule in Jordan was characterized by what historians politely call benign neglect. The Ottomans viewed Jordan primarily as a transit route for pilgrims travelling to Mecca and a buffer zone protecting their more valuable territories from Bedouin raids. They invested just enough resources to maintain basic security and administrative control, but they were generally content to leave local communities to manage their own affairs as long as taxes were paid and the pilgrimage routes remained open. This hands-off approach had mixed consequences. Local communities enjoyed considerable autonomy and maintained traditional ways of life, but the lack of Ottoman investment meant that much of Jordan's infrastructure gradually deteriorated. Roads fell into disrepair, irrigation systems were abandoned, and many towns were gradually depopulated. The Ottomans did invest in specific projects related to their strategic priorities. They built fortress-like structures along the pilgrimage route and maintained payments to Bedouin tribes to ensure safe passage for pilgrims. The most ambitious Ottoman project was the Hejaz Railway, built between 1900 and 1908 to connect Damascus to Medina. This narrow-gauge line facilitated pilgrimage but also served strategic military purposes, making it a target during the Arab Revolt of World War I. The Ottoman system of administration in Jordan was fairly typical of the empire's approach to governing distant provinces. The region was divided between the provinces of Damascus and the Hejaz, with local governors maintaining order through a combination of direct administration in major towns and indirect rule in the countryside, where traditional tribal leaders continued to exercise authority under Ottoman supervision. Managing the relationship between settled agricultural communities and nomadic Bedouin tribes remained a constant challenge, requiring a careful balance of subsidies and military pressure. By the 19th century, Ottoman rule in Jordan was becoming increasingly tenuous. The empire was facing financial difficulties, military challenges on multiple fronts, and growing pressure from European powers. In Jordan, this manifested as increased tribal unrest, declining investment in infrastructure, and a general sense that the Ottoman system was no longer working effectively. Several major tribal revolts occurred during this period, including the Karak Revolt of 1910, which required substantial military forces to suppress. The end of Ottoman rule came during World War I, when the empire made the fateful decision to ally with Germany and Austria-Hungary against Britain, France, and Russia. This decision provided the British with both the opportunity and the justification to support Arab nationalist movements that had been developing in the Ottoman Empire's Arab territories. In 1916, Sharif Hussein of Mecca launched the Arab Revolt with British support, beginning a campaign that would ultimately lead to the establishment of modern Jordan. Looking back over these turbulent centuries, from the Islamic conquest through the Ottoman period, Jordan emerges as a land that has consistently found itself at the crossroads of larger historical forces. Whether serving as the heartland of Umayyad power, the frontier of Crusader Muslim conflict, or the transit route of Ottoman pilgrimage caravans, Jordan has always been shaped by its position between different worlds, between desert and farmland, between Arabia and Syria, between East and West. As we'll see in our next chapter, this role as a crossroads would continue to define Jordan's experience in the modern era. as new political arrangements emerged from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Chapter 3: Modern Emergence and the Hashemite Kingdom. By 1914, the Ottoman Empire was known as the sick man of Europe, a once mighty power struggling to maintain control over its vast territories. In Jordan, the signs of imperial decline were everywhere: crumbling infrastructure, rebellious tribes, and a growing sense among the Arab population that their future lay elsewhere. The final blow came when the empire made the catastrophic decision to join Germany and Austria-Hungary in World War I, transforming what had been a European conflict into a global struggle that would reshape the entire Middle East. The spark that would ignite the Arab nationalist movement came from an unlikely source: correspondence between a British official in Egypt and an aging Hashemite ruler in Mecca. The McMahon-Hussein correspondence, exchanged between 1915 and 1916, promised British support for Arab independence in exchange for an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. What emerged from these negotiations was one of the most consequential miscommunications in diplomatic history, as both sides interpreted the vague language to suit their own ambitions. Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca and guardian of Islam's holiest sites, found himself in an extraordinary position. As a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad and ruler of the Hejaz, he possessed the religious authority to legitimize an Arab uprising against the Ottoman Sultan, who claimed the title of Caliph. On June 5, 1916, Hussein launched the Great Arab Revolt by attacking the Ottoman garrison in Mecca, beginning a campaign that would fundamentally alter the political landscape of the modern Middle East. The revolt's success owed much to the remarkable partnership between Hussein's sons and an eccentric British officer named T.E. Lawrence, who would later become famous as Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence understood that conventional European warfare tactics would be useless in the Arabian desert. Instead, he helped the Arab forces develop a strategy of guerrilla warfare that played to their strengths: mobility, local knowledge, and the ability to disappear into the vast expanses of desert when conventional forces approached. The Arab forces proved devastatingly effective at disrupting Ottoman communications and supply lines. They repeatedly attacked the Hejaz railway, turning what had once been the Ottomans' technological pride into a costly vulnerability. Each successful raid demonstrated to Bedouin tribes throughout the region that the empire could be defeated, encouraging more groups to join the revolt. Prince Faisal, Hussein's third son, emerged as the military leader of the Arab forces, while his brother Abdullah commanded the Eastern Front. The campaign reached its climax in July 1917 with the capture of Aqaba, Jordan's only port city. This victory was particularly dramatic because the Arab forces attacked from the land side, through the desert, while the Ottoman defenders had positioned their guns to repel a naval assault. It was rather like attacking a castle by coming through the servants' entrance while the defenders were watching the main gate. By October 1918, Arab forces had captured Damascus, and Faisal proclaimed the Arab Kingdom of Syria, which included the territory of modern Jordan. For a brief, heady moment it seemed that Arab independence had been achieved, and that the Hashemites would rule a unified kingdom stretching from Syria to the Arabian Peninsula. However, the reality of post-war politics proved far more complicated than the wartime promises had suggested. The problems began with the revelation of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret treaty between Britain and France that divided the former Ottoman territories between their respective spheres of influence. This agreement fundamentally contradicted the commitments made in the McMahon-Hussein correspondence. The Arabs felt betrayed, and this sense of betrayal would poison relations with Western powers for generations. In July 1920, French forces attacked Faisal's kingdom and forced him to flee Damascus. The Arab kingdom of Syria collapsed after existing for less than 2 years, leaving the Hashemites without the unified Arab state they had been promised. It was at this critical moment that Abdullah, Faisal's younger brother, decided to take matters into his own hands. In November 1920, he arrived in the Jordanian town of Amman with several hundred armed followers, ostensibly planning to gather tribal support and march north to restore his brother to the Syrian throne. The British found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They had lost control of their former ally, Faisal. They faced the prospect of ongoing instability in the region, and they needed to find a face-saving solution that would honour at least some of their wartime commitments to the Hashemites. Abdullah's unexpected arrival in Jordan provided them with an opportunity to resolve several problems simultaneously. In March 1921, Winston Churchill, then colonial secretary, met with Abdullah in Jerusalem and proposed a deal that would reshape the region. Abdullah would become emir of the newly created Emirate of Transjordan, ruling under British supervision but with considerable autonomy. Meanwhile, his brother Faisal would be installed as King of Iraq, another British mandate. It was an elegant solution to a complicated problem. The British could maintain control while appearing to honour their commitments to Arab independence. Abdullah initially viewed his appointment as ruler of Transjordan with some disappointment. He had hoped for Syria, or at least a larger territory, and Transjordan seemed like a consolation prize. A sparsely populated, economically marginal region with little apparent strategic value. However, he possessed the political wisdom to recognize that half a kingdom was better than no kingdom at all, and he set about the challenging task of building a modern state from scratch. The challenges were formidable. Transjordan had a population of only about 200,000 people, roughly half nomadic Bedouins who recognized no authority beyond their tribal leaders. There was virtually no modern infrastructure, and the territory was plagued by raids from Wahhabi forces based in what is now Saudi Arabia. Abdullah's greatest asset was his ability to navigate complex tribal politics. As a Hashemite, he possessed religious legitimacy, but he also understood the practical necessities of tribal leadership, demonstrating strength, distributing patronage wisely, and maintaining the delicate balance between competing groups. The foundation of Abdullah's success was the creation of the Arab Legion under British officers like Frederick Peake and later John Bagot Glubb. The force combined British training with local knowledge and Arab fighting traditions, proving crucial for maintaining internal security and establishing Abdullah's credibility. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, Abdullah gradually consolidated control while carefully managing his relationship with the British. He established schools, courts, and administrative offices, improved infrastructure, and created a functioning tax system. He also demonstrated considerable diplomatic skill in managing relationships with neighbours, maintaining cordial relations while avoiding entanglement in growing regional tensions. World War II provided Abdullah with an opportunity to demonstrate his value as a British ally. While some Arab leaders flirted with Germany, believing that a German victory might lead to Arab independence, Abdullah remained firmly committed to the Allied cause. The Arab Legion participated in the British campaigns in Iraq and Syria, helping to suppress pro-Axis movements and maintain British control over strategically vital territories. This loyalty paid dividends when the war ended and the international climate became more favourable to decolonisation. In March 1946, Britain signed the Treaty of London, recognising Transjordan as a sovereign state. On May 25, 1946, a date still celebrated as Independence Day in Jordan, Abdullah was proclaimed king, and the Emirate of Transjordan became the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan. However, true independence brought new challenges, particularly the question of Palestine. The United Nations Partition Plan of 1947 proposed dividing British Mandate Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. But Abdullah had his own ideas about how this should be resolved. He had been conducting secret negotiations with Jewish leaders for years, and he believed that the proposed Palestinian Arab state was not viable as an independent entity. When the First Arab-Israeli War erupted in 1948, following Israel's declaration of independence, Abdullah pursued a careful strategy designed to advance Jordanian interests while appearing to support the broader Arab cause. While other Arab armies focused on destroying Israel entirely, Abdullah concentrated on securing the areas allocated to the Palestinian Arabs under the UN partition plan, particularly the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The Arab Legion's performance during the 1948 war was mixed, but generally more effective than that of other Arab forces. They successfully captured and held the old city of Jerusalem and most of the West Bank, but they were unable to prevent Israeli forces from securing their independence and even expanding beyond the original partition boundaries. When the war ended with armistice agreements in 1949, Jordan found itself controlling significant new territory but also facing massive new responsibilities. The annexation of the West Bank in 1950 fundamentally transformed Jordan's character. The kingdom's population nearly doubled overnight, with roughly half the new citizens being Palestinian refugees. Unlike other Arab countries, Jordan granted full citizenship to Palestinian refugees, a decision that was both generous and politically shrewd, creating loyalty to the Hashemite crown while providing a more educated population. However, integration was challenging. Many Palestinians resented Hashemite rule and dreamed of returning home, while many Transjordanians worried about being overwhelmed. The annexation also brought Islam's most sacred sites in Jerusalem, enhancing Abdullah's religious legitimacy, but making Jordan a focal point for broader Arab and Islamic concerns about Israeli policies. Tragically, Abdullah's remarkable political career came to an abrupt end on July 20, 1951, when he was assassinated by a Palestinian gunman while attending Friday prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. The assassin was motivated by anger over Abdullah's perceived willingness to negotiate with Israel and his suppression of Palestinian nationalist activities. The king's grandson, the future King Hussein, witnessed the assassination, a traumatic experience that would shape his own approach to leadership for decades to come. Abdullah's death created a succession crisis, as his eldest son Talal suffered from mental illness that made him unsuitable for long-term rule. After a brief reign of less than a year, Talal was forced to abdicate in favour of his teenage son Hussein, who became king in 1952 at the age of 17. The young monarch inherited a kingdom facing enormous challenges, economic difficulties, political tensions between different communities, pressure from radical Arab nationalist movements, and the constant threat of conflict with Israel. King Hussein's reign, which would last for nearly 5 decades, began during one of the most turbulent periods in Middle Eastern history. The 1950s and 60s saw the rise of Arab nationalism under Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Suez Crisis, repeated military coups in neighbouring countries, and growing tensions between the superpowers as the Cold War extended into the Middle East. For a young monarch ruling a poor, small country surrounded by larger and more powerful neighbours, survival required extraordinary political skill and more than a little luck. The greatest test of Hussein's reign came during the Six-Day War of 1967. Despite Israeli warnings to stay out of the conflict, Hussein felt compelled by domestic pressure and Arab solidarity to join Egypt and Syria in their confrontation with Israel. The decision proved catastrophic. Within 3 days, Jordan lost the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and all the gains that had been made since 1948. The loss of the West Bank was more than just a military defeat. It was a fundamental transformation of Jordan's character and prospects. The kingdom lost its most economically productive territory, its most sacred religious sites, and roughly half its population. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees fled across the Jordan River, creating a humanitarian crisis and further straining the kingdom's limited resources. The aftermath of the Six-Day War demonstrated both the resilience of Jordanian institutions and the wisdom of Abdullah's original state-building efforts. Despite the devastating defeat, the kingdom did not collapse. The military remained loyal to the crown, and the basic structures of government continued to function. However, the defeat also created new challenges, as Palestinian militant organizations established a virtual state within a state in Jordan, using the kingdom as a base for attacks against Israel while challenging Hashemite authority. The tensions between the Hashemite monarchy and Palestinian militant groups eventually erupted into civil war in September 1970, a period known as Black September. King Hussein's decision to use military force against the Palestine Liberation Organization and other militant groups was enormously controversial, straining Jordan's relationships with other Arab countries and creating lasting resentments within the Palestinian community. However, the crisis also demonstrated Hussein's political courage and the loyalty of the East Bank Jordanian population to the Hashemite crown. The king's victory in the civil war established clear Jordanian sovereignty throughout the kingdom's remaining territory and ended the period when Jordan served as a launching pad for Palestinian attacks against Israel. As we look back over this remarkable period, from the collapse of Ottoman rule through the establishment of the Hashemite Kingdom and its early trials, several themes emerge that continue to define Jordan's character. The kingdom's survival has always depended on skillful leadership that can balance competing pressures. Its prosperity has required maintaining relationships with more powerful neighbours while preserving enough independence to pursue distinctly Jordanian interests. And its stability has rested on the ability to integrate different communities under Hashemite rule while respecting the legitimate aspirations of all citizens. Chapter 4: Geography and Natural Wonders. After journeying through millennia of human history, it's time to explore the stage upon which all these dramatic events have played out, the remarkable physical geography of Jordan itself. This is a land where nature seems to have experimented with every possible landscape feature, creating a country that packs an extraordinary variety of environments into a relatively small space. From snow-capped highlands to blazing deserts, from lush valleys to salt-crusted shores, Jordan is essentially a geological greatest hits collection compressed into an area slightly smaller than the state of Indiana. The single most defining feature of Jordan's geography is the Great Rift Valley, a massive geological scar that runs along the country's western border and ranks among the most dramatic topographical features on Earth. This isn't just any valley, it's part of a colossal crack in the planet's surface that stretches over 6,000 kilometers from Turkey's Taurus Mountains all the way to Mozambique in southeastern Africa. The Rift Valley represents the boundary between the African and Arabian tectonic plates, which have been slowly pulling apart for millions of years, creating a depression that in Jordan becomes home to some of the world's most extraordinary natural phenomena. The Jordan River, despite its modest size, flows through this Rift Valley and holds significance far beyond what its physical dimensions might suggest. The river begins its journey from several sources near Mount Hermon on the Lebanese-Syrian border, flowing south through the Sea of Galilee before entering Jordanian territory. At first glance, calling it a great river might seem like geographical optimism. It's only about 250 kilometers long, and in many places you could probably throw a stone across it. However, Its importance to the region's ecology, agriculture, and spiritual life cannot be overstated. What makes the Jordan River truly remarkable is its dramatic descent. From its mountain headwaters at about 3,000 meters above sea level, it drops to more than 400 meters below sea level where it reaches the Dead Sea. This represents one of the steepest gradients of any river system on Earth, creating a unique ecological corridor that connects dramatically different climate zones within a relatively short distance. You could theoretically start your day skiing in the mountains of Lebanon and end it floating in the Dead Sea, though the logistics might be challenging. The Jordan River's main tributary within Jordanian territory is the Yarmouk River, which forms part of Jordan's border with Syria. The Yarmouk once nearly doubled the Jordan's flow, though this has been significantly reduced in recent decades due to upstream damming and irrigation projects. The river system is fed by seasonal streams called Wadis, an Arabic word that perfectly captures these watercourses that can transform from bone-dry gullies to raging torrents within hours when winter rains arrive. The Jordan Valley itself, known locally as the Gore, represents one of the most fertile and strategically important regions in the country. This narrow strip of land, averaging about 10 kilometers in width, enjoys a subtropical climate that allows year-round agriculture. The contrast between the verdant fields of the Jordan Valley and the surrounding arid hills is so dramatic it almost seems like stepping between different worlds. Winter temperatures rarely drop below freezing, while summer heat can reach levels that make the valley feel like nature's own sauna. At the southern end of the Jordan River lies one of the most extraordinary bodies of water on Earth, the Dead Sea. At 430 meters below sea level, the Dead Sea holds the distinction of being the lowest point on the planet's surface, but its location is only the beginning of what makes this place so remarkable. The Dead Sea is not actually a sea at all, but rather a hypersaline lake with no outlet except evaporation. This means that for thousands of years, water flowing into the lake has left behind its dissolved minerals when it evaporates, creating a concentration of salts and minerals unlike anywhere else on Earth. The Dead Sea's salinity reaches about 34%, nearly 10 times saltier than ordinary seawater. This creates water so dense that swimming becomes floating, and floating becomes an almost surreal experience where the laws of buoyancy seem reversed. The mineral composition is equally extraordinary, rich in magnesium, potassium, calcium and bromide rather than the sodium chloride that dominates most salt water. These minerals have been prized for their therapeutic properties since ancient times. Cleopatra supposedly established cosmetic factories here, and King Herod built health resorts along its shores. The Dead Sea's extreme salinity means that no fish or large aquatic organisms can survive in its waters, hence the name. However, this apparently lifeless environment occasionally surprises scientists. During particularly wet years, the salinity can drop enough to allow specialized bacteria and algae to bloom, sometimes turning the normally blue water brilliant red or green. It's rather like discovering that your seemingly dead houseplant has secretly been planning a spectacular comeback. Unfortunately, the Dead Sea faces serious environmental challenges. Since the 1960s, water diversions from the Jordan River for agriculture and urban use have dramatically reduced the inflow to the lake. Combined with mineral extraction operations, this has caused the water level to drop by more than 30 meters, and the lake continues to shrink by about 1 meter each year. As the water recedes, it leaves behind striking salt formations and creates dangerous sinkholes where underground salt deposits dissolve, causing the ground above to collapse without warning. Moving eastward from the Rift Valley, the landscape rises sharply to form Jordan's Highland Plateau, a region that encompasses most of the country's population centres and agricultural land. This plateau region, extending from the Syrian border in the north to Saudi Arabia in the south, represents the western edge of the vast Arabian Peninsula. Elevations range from 600 to 1500 meters above sea level, creating a Mediterranean climate zone that receives enough rainfall to support agriculture and dense human settlement. The northern highlands, historically known as Gilead, enjoy the most favourable climate in Jordan. This region around Ajlan and Irbid receives up to 600 millimeters of rainfall per year, quite generous by Middle Eastern standards, and supports olive groves, wheat fields, and Mediterranean-style vegetation. The landscape here resembles parts of southern Europe more than the stereotypical image of the Middle East, with rolling hills covered in oak and pine forests. As you travel south across the plateau, the climate becomes progressively more arid, and the landscape gradually transitions from Mediterranean to desert. The capital city of Amman sits in the central part of this region, built across numerous hills at an elevation that provides relief from the heat of the Jordan Valley, while still receiving enough rainfall to support urban development. The city's location represents a classic example of Middle Eastern urban geography, high enough to be cool and defensible, but close enough to water sources and trade routes to be economically viable. The eastern and southeastern regions of Jordan are dominated by desert, vast expanses of the Arabian desert that extend into Saudi Arabia and Iraq. This is the Badia, accounting for about 80% of Jordan's total area but supporting less than 5% of its population. The desert regions are far from uniform, encompassing several distinct geographical zones, each with its own character and challenges. In the northeast lies the Basalt Desert, a fascinating landscape created by ancient volcanic activity. Black basalt rocks cover the ground like a cosmic rock garden, creating an almost lunar environment that extends into Syria and Saudi Arabia. The weathering of these volcanic rocks under extreme temperature variations, scorching days and cold nights, has produced distinctive boulder fields and geological formations that appear almost extraterrestrial. The eastern desert, northeast of Amman, contains the Azraq Oasis, one of the few natural wetlands in Jordan and a crucial stopover point for millions of migratory birds travelling between Europe and Africa. The oasis has supported human settlement for thousands of years and served as a headquarters for T.E. Lawrence during the Arab Revolt. However, overpumping of groundwater for agriculture and urban use has dramatically reduced the oasis's size, illustrating the delicate balance between human needs and environmental sustainability in arid regions. Perhaps the most famous of Jordan's desert regions is Wadi Rum, located in the south near the Saudi border. Known as the Valley of the Moon, Wadi Rum features some of the most spectacular desert scenery in the world. Massive sandstone mountains called Jebels rise from the desert floor like ancient monuments, their red and orange surfaces carved by millions of years of wind and water erosion into fantastic shapes and formations. Natural arches, narrow canyons, and towering rock bridges create a landscape that seems more suited to science fiction films than earthly geography, which may explain why Wadi Rum has served as the setting for several Mars movies. The sandstone formations of Wadi Rum tell a geological story spanning hundreds of millions of years. These rocks began as sand dunes in ancient deserts, were compressed into stone, uplifted by tectonic forces, and then carved by erosion into their current spectacular forms. The different coloured layers in the rock faces represent different geological epochs, creating a natural library of Earth's history written in stone. Wadi Rum is also culturally significant as the traditional territory of several Bedouin tribes who have adapted their lifestyle to this harsh but beautiful environment. These desert dwellers developed sophisticated knowledge of navigation, water sources, and survival techniques that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would challenge modern technology. Their traditional black goat hair tents, camel herding practices, and oral poetry traditions represent one of the world's most successful adaptations to desert life. Jordan's climate reflects its position at the intersection of Mediterranean and desert climate zones. The western highlands enjoy a Mediterranean pattern with wet winters and dry summers, while the eastern deserts experience an arid continental climate with extreme temperature variations and minimal rainfall. This climatic diversity within a relatively small country creates opportunities for different types of agriculture and economic activity, but also presents challenges for water management and urban planning. Winter rains, falling primarily between November and April, are crucial for both agriculture and groundwater recharge. However, rainfall is highly variable from year to year, and drought years can have severe impacts on both rural and urban communities. The country's position on the edge of major climate zones also makes it vulnerable to climate change, with predictions suggesting that temperatures will increase and already limited rainfall may decrease further. Water scarcity represents Jordan's greatest environmental challenge and has shaped the country's development patterns throughout history. With annual renewable water resources of less than 100 cubic meters per person, well below the international water poverty line, Jordan ranks among the world's most water-scarce countries. This scarcity has intensified due to population growth, refugee influxes, climate change, and the overexploitation of both surface and groundwater resources. The country's main aquifer systems, underground water sources that took thousands of years to accumulate, are being depleted faster than they can naturally recharge. The Azraq Basin, the Wadi Araba aquifer, and other groundwater sources show declining water levels and increasing salinity as extraction exceeds sustainable limits. This situation has forced Jordan to invest heavily in alternative water sources, including desalination plants, wastewater treatment and reuse, and water conservation technologies. Despite these challenges, Jordan's geography also provides opportunities. The intense solar radiation in desert regions offers enormous potential for solar energy development. The elevation differences between the Dead Sea and surrounding highlands could be harnessed for pumped storage hydropower. The country's position as a land bridge between continents makes it a natural hub for trade and transportation, and the dramatic landscape variations within short distances create opportunities for tourism that ranges from beach resorts to mountain hiking to desert adventures. Jordan's diverse geography has also created remarkable biodiversity for such an arid country. The Rift Valley serves as a migration corridor for birds travelling between Africa and Eurasia, making Jordan one of the world's premier birdwatching destinations. The country hosts over 400 bird species, including spectacular raptors, colourful bee-eaters, and massive flocks of migrating storks. Desert regions support specially adapted species like the Arabian oryx, sand cats, and various reptiles and insects that have evolved to survive extreme conditions. As we complete our tour of Jordan's physical geography, what emerges is a portrait of extraordinary diversity packed into a relatively small space. This is a country where you can experience alpine meadows and scorching deserts, ancient geological formations and active tectonic processes, Mediterranean forests and Arabian sand dunes, all within a few hours' drive. The dramatic variations in elevation, climate and landscape have created distinct regional identities and economic opportunities, while also presenting significant challenges for water management, urban development, and environmental conservation. Understanding this geographical complexity is essential for appreciating how the remarkable history we've explored has unfolded across such a varied and challenging, yet ultimately rewarding, natural stage. Chapter 5: Cultural Heritage and Archaeological Treasures. Having explored the physical landscape that has shaped Jordan's history, We now turn to examine the extraordinary cultural treasures that emerge from this terrain, the monuments, artifacts, and traditions that tell the story of human creativity and adaptation across millennia. Jordan functions as a vast outdoor museum where successive civilizations have left their calling cards carved in stone, painted on walls, and woven into the very fabric of daily life. From the rose-red facades of Petra to the perfectly preserved Roman theatres of Jerash, from ancient desert castles to traditional Bedouin crafts, this is a land where cultural heritage isn't merely preserved behind glass cases, but continues to breathe life into the present. No discussion of Jordanian cultural heritage can begin anywhere other than Petra, the crown jewel of Nabataean civilization and arguably the most spectacular archaeological site in the Middle East. Originally known to its inhabitants as Rakhmu, Petra represents something far more significant than tourist postcards can convey. It stands as a testament to the ingenuity of a people who transformed one of Earth's most challenging environments into a thriving metropolis that controlled the wealth of nations. The Nabataeans were originally nomadic Arab tribes who settled in the 4th century BC in what would become their extraordinary capital. Their genius lay in recognizing this location's potential as the perfect strategic position for controlling the ancient world's most lucrative trade routes. Frankincense from Yemen, spices from India, silk from China, and precious goods from across Arabia all had to pass through this narrow corridor between the desert and the Dead Sea, and the Nabataeans positioned themselves as the ultimate middlemen. What makes Petra so architecturally remarkable is how the Nabataeans literally carved their city from the living rock. Using techniques that remain impressive even by modern standards, they sculpted elaborate facades directly into the sandstone cliffs, creating structures that seem to grow organically from the landscape itself. The famous treasury, or Al-Khazneh, which serves as Petra's most iconic image, demonstrates this fusion of natural and artificial beauty. Standing over 40 meters high, its Hellenistic columns and classical pediments emerge from rose-colored stone, as if revealed by some divine sculptor. But Petra was never just about impressive architecture. It was an engineering marvel that solved the fundamental problem of desert-urban development: water. The Nabataeans created one of the ancient world's most sophisticated hydraulic systems, carving channels, building dams, and constructing systems that could capture and store every precious drop of seasonal rainfall. They developed ceramic pipe systems, settling tanks, and distribution networks that supported a population estimated at 20 to 30,000 people in an environment that today seems barely capable of sustaining a small village. The variety of architectural styles represented in Petra tells the story of a cosmopolitan trading culture that absorbed influences from across the known world. Assyrian motifs blend with Egyptian traditions, Hellenistic designs merge with local Arabian elements, and later Roman additions create a unique architectural language that reflects Petra's role as a meeting point of civilizations. The monastery, or Ad-Dir, showcases this fusion perfectly. Its massive facade combines Nabataean rock-cutting techniques with classical architectural elements to create something entirely distinctive. The religious life of Petra reveals another layer of cultural complexity. The Nabataeans originally worshipped gods represented by abstract stone blocks called betils, but as their trading relationships expanded, their religious practices evolved to incorporate Greek and Roman deities. This religious syncretism reflects a culture comfortable with adaptation and cultural exchange, traits that served them well in their role as international traders. Perhaps most remarkably, the majority of Petra's monuments were tombs, suggesting a culture deeply concerned with honouring the dead and ensuring proper passage to the afterlife. The Nabataeans viewed earthly life as a brief journey and invested enormous resources in creating elaborate burial chambers that would serve their loved ones for eternity. From simple shaft graves to the spectacular royal tombs carved high into the cliff faces, these monuments represent one of antiquity's most extensive and artistically sophisticated funerary landscapes. When Roman forces annexed the Nabataean Kingdom in 106 AD, Petra didn't simply disappear, it evolved. Roman urban planning brought new architectural elements including a colonnaded street, expanded theatre, and grand public buildings that blended Roman engineering with Nabataean stonework traditions. The city continued to thrive for several more centuries until changing trade routes and a devastating earthquake in 363 AD began its gradual decline. Petra's rediscovery in 1812 by Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt marked the beginning of its transformation from lost city to global icon. Burckhardt, disguising himself as a Muslim pilgrim seeking the tomb of Aaron, convinced a local Bedouin guide to bring him to the ruins that had become legendary among local tribes, but remained unknown to the wider world. His vivid descriptions sparked imaginations across Europe and began the process that would eventually lead to Petra's recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Moving north from Petra, we encounter another remarkable archaeological treasure that represents a completely different aspect of Jordan's cultural heritage: the Roman city of Jerash. Known in antiquity as Gerasa, Jerash stands as one of the best preserved Roman provincial cities anywhere in the world, offering visitors an almost complete picture of urban life during the height of the Roman Empire. Unlike Petra, which was carved from stone, Jerash was built with traditional construction techniques, but its preservation is so exceptional that walking through its streets provides an almost surreal time travel experience. Jerash was one of the cities of the Decapolis, a league of 10 Greco-Roman cities that formed a powerful cultural and economic alliance across the region. Founded originally by Alexander the Great's successors, the city reached its golden age under Roman rule when it became known for its wealth, sophistication, and architectural grandeur. The Romans recognized Jerash's strategic importance and invested heavily in transforming it into a showcase of imperial urban planning. The first thing that strikes visitors to Jerash is the sheer scale and completeness of the ruins. You enter through Hadrian's Arch, a triumphant gateway built to honor Emperor Hadrian's visit in 129 AD, and immediately find yourself facing the extraordinary Oval Plaza, a huge elliptical public square surrounded by 56 Ionic columns that creates one of the most distinctive urban spaces in the ancient world. From there, the main street, the Cardo Maximus, stretches for 800 meters in a perfectly straight line, paved with original stones that still bear the rut marks from ancient chariot wheels. What makes Jerash so remarkable is that virtually every element of Roman urban life is represented and preserved. The South Theatre, with its perfect acoustics and capacity for 5,000 spectators, still hosts performances today. The Temple of Artemis, dedicated to the city's patron goddess, towers over the surrounding landscape with its massive columns visible from miles away. The Nymphaeum, an ornate public fountain, demonstrates the Roman genius for combining practical infrastructure with artistic beauty. Public baths, private houses, shops, and administrative buildings create a complete picture of how a prosperous Roman city functioned. The cultural significance of Jerash extends beyond its Roman heritage. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence of continuous human occupation stretching back over 6,500 years. Early Christian churches built within the Roman framework show how the city adapted to changing religious circumstances, while later Islamic period buildings demonstrate how successive cultures made use of the existing urban infrastructure. Jerash also serves as a window into the cultural fusion that characterized Roman provincial life in the Middle East. While the city's architecture and urban planning reflect Roman ideals, local traditions and Semitic cultural elements are woven throughout its fabric. Inscriptions in Greek, Latin, and Aramaic reflect the multilingual nature of the community, while artistic motifs blend classical and regional influences. This cultural mixing created distinctive local variations of Roman civilization that were neither purely Roman nor purely local, but something uniquely Jordanian. The preservation of Jerash owes much to a combination of climate and historical circumstances. The dry conditions of the Jordanian plateau prevented the decay that affected many Roman sites in wetter climates, while a devastating earthquake in 747 AD, followed by gradual abandonment, meant that later construction didn't obliterate the Roman remains. When 19th and 20th century archaeologists began systematic excavation and restoration work, they found structures in remarkably complete condition, allowing for the comprehensive picture visitors enjoy today. Beyond these spectacular archaeological sites, Jordan's cultural heritage encompasses a rich tradition of Islamic architecture and decorative arts that reflects the country's central role in the Islamic world. The Umayyad desert castles scattered across Jordan's eastern regions represent some of the earliest and most significant examples of Islamic palatial architecture. These 8th century structures weren't simply fortresses, but rather served as hunting lodges, agricultural estates, and retreat centers for the Umayyad caliphs who ruled the early Islamic empire from Damascus. Qusayr Amra, perhaps the most famous of these desert castles, contains some of the Islamic world's most remarkable frescoes. The paintings that cover its walls and ceiling represent a unique artistic treasure. Figurative art that includes hunting scenes, astronomical charts, classical mythology, and even portraits of contemporary rulers. These frescoes demonstrate the cultural confidence of early Islamic civilization and its willingness to incorporate artistic traditions from Byzantine, Persian, and classical sources. Discovering them is rather like finding an Islamic equivalent of the Sistine Chapel hidden in the Jordanian desert. The engineering sophistication of these desert establishments reflects the same kind of hydraulic expertise that the Nabataeans had mastered centuries earlier. The Umayyads built elaborate irrigation systems, designed efficient bathhouses, and created agricultural installations that supported intensive cultivation in marginal environments. These weren't merely occasional retreats, but rather represented serious investments in developing the economic potential of Jordan's desert regions. Traditional Bedouin culture represents another crucial dimension of Jordan's living cultural heritage. For over 1,000 years, nomadic Arab tribes have developed sophisticated strategies for surviving and thriving in Jordan's desert environments, creating cultural traditions perfectly adapted to the challenges and opportunities of arid landscapes. Bedouin traditional knowledge encompasses everything from astronomy and navigation to animal husbandry and environmental management, representing accumulated wisdom that enabled sustainable life in some of Earth's most challenging conditions. The material culture of Bedouin life, their distinctive black goat hair tents, intricately woven rugs and textiles, silver jewellery, and traditional weapons, represents functional art of the highest order. Each piece serves practical purposes while embodying aesthetic principles and cultural meanings that connect individual objects to larger patterns of tribal identity and social organization. The geometric patterns that characterize Bedouin textiles, for example, aren't merely decorative but often encode information about tribal affiliations, family histories, and social status. Bedouin oral traditions preserve an equally important aspect of cultural heritage. Traditional poetry, storytelling, and historical narratives maintain collective memory across generations, while providing frameworks for understanding human relationships with both the natural and social environment. The elaborate codes of hospitality and honor that govern Bedouin social interactions have influenced broader Middle Eastern cultural values and continue to shape contemporary Jordanian social life. The relationship between traditional Bedouin culture and the archaeological sites scattered across Jordan creates fascinating layers of cultural continuity. Many Bedouin tribes maintain traditional knowledge about ancient water sources, seasonal migration routes, and astronomical observations that complement what archaeologists discover through excavation. The Bedouin tribes who lived in and around Petra before its designation as a World Heritage Site possessed intimate knowledge of the site's water systems, seasonal climate patterns, and architectural features that proved invaluable to conservation efforts. Jordan's Christian heritage adds yet another dimension to its cultural complexity. As one of the earliest centers of Christian life outside Palestine, Jordan preserves significant early Christian archaeological remains and continues to support vibrant Christian communities today. The baptism site of Jesus at Bethany beyond the Jordan represents one of Christianity's most sacred locations, while early Christian churches in places like Madaba contain some of the world's finest examples of Byzantine mosaic art. The famous Madaba map, created in the 6th century, represents one of the earliest and most accurate maps of the Holy Land, executed entirely in mosaic tiles. This remarkable work of art functions simultaneously as geographic documentation, religious instruction, and artistic masterpiece, demonstrating how early Christian communities in Jordan served as bridges between different cultural and intellectual traditions. The precision with which the Madaba map depicts Jerusalem and other biblical sites has proven invaluable to modern archaeologists and urban planners working to understand the historical development of Middle Eastern cities. Contemporary Jordanian culture continues to reflect this multicultural heritage while adapting to modern circumstances. Traditional crafts like pottery, weaving, and metalwork persist alongside modern industries, often producing items that blend ancient techniques with contemporary designs. The renewed interest in traditional Jordanian cuisine reflects both tourism demands and a genuine cultural revival that values local ingredients, seasonal cooking practices, and regional specialties that connect modern Jordanians to their diverse cultural roots. What emerges from this survey of Jordan's cultural heritage is a picture of remarkable diversity unified by common themes of adaptation, cultural exchange, and creative response to environmental challenges. Whether we're examining Nabataean hydraulic engineering, Roman urban planning, Islamic decorative arts, or Bedouin environmental knowledge, we consistently encounter evidence of human communities that succeeded by remaining flexible, absorbing useful innovations from other cultures, and developing sustainable relationships with their challenging but rewarding environment. Chapter 6: Modern Jordan and Contemporary Challenges. As we reach the final chapter of our journey through Jordan's remarkable history and geography, we must turn our attention to the contemporary kingdom, a nation that continues to navigate the complex currents of the 21st century with the same adaptability and diplomatic skill that has characterized its survival for millennia. Modern Jordan stands as a fascinating case study of how traditional societies manage the challenges of globalization, regional instability, and resource scarcity while maintaining their cultural identity and playing an outsized role in international affairs. This is a small country with big responsibilities, a place where ancient wisdom meets modern realities in ways both inspiring and challenging. The foundation of Jordan's modern success story lies in the peace treaty signed with Israel in 1994, making Jordan only the second Arab country after Egypt to formally recognize Israel. This landmark agreement, negotiated through intensive diplomatic efforts by King Hussein, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and US President Bill Clinton, represented far more than just an end to hostilities. It established Jordan as a crucial mediator in Middle Eastern politics and opened doors to economic opportunities that continue to benefit the kingdom today. The signing ceremony at the Arava border crossing symbolized not just the end of decades of conflict, but the beginning of a new regional paradigm based on pragmatic cooperation rather than ideological confrontation. The peace treaty's significance extends beyond diplomatic symbolism to concrete economic benefits. Qualified industrial zones were established along the Jordan-Israel border, allowing Jordanian companies that use a percentage of Israeli inputs to export duty-free to the United States. These zones have generated tens of thousands of jobs and become a significant engine of economic growth, demonstrating how pragmatic diplomacy can translate into tangible improvements in people's lives. The agreement also facilitated cooperation in crucial areas like water sharing, tourism development, and technology transfer. King Hussein's vision of peace as more than just the absence of war, his desire for what he called warm peace between the children of Abraham, reflected the kingdom's broader approach to regional diplomacy. Jordan has consistently positioned itself as a voice of moderation and stability, serving as a bridge between different factions and facilitating dialogue when other channels fail. This diplomatic tradition continues under King Abdullah II, who has maintained Jordan's reputation as a trusted interlocutor in a region often marked by mutual suspicion and competing interests. However, Jordan's greatest contemporary challenge has emerged from its very success as a haven of stability. Since the Syrian civil war began in 2011, Jordan has absorbed over 1.4 million Syrian refugees, including approximately 660,000 registered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. This represents an increase of nearly 20% in Jordan's total population, equivalent to the United States suddenly hosting 60 million refugees. The sheer scale of this humanitarian response has placed extraordinary strains on Jordan's infrastructure, economy, and social fabric. The refugee crisis illuminates both the best and most difficult aspects of contemporary Jordan. On one hand, the kingdom's willingness to keep its borders open to desperate families fleeing war reflects the deepest values of Jordanian and Arab hospitality traditions. Unlike some neighbouring countries, Jordan has avoided harsh anti-refugee rhetoric and has worked to integrate refugee children into its education system and provide basic healthcare services. This humanitarian response has earned international admiration and reinforced Jordan's reputation as a stabilizing force in a turbulent region. On the other hand, the economic impact has been severe. The World Bank estimates that Syrian refugees cost Jordan more than $2.5 billion annually, representing about 6% of GDP and 25% of the government's annual revenue. Unemployment rates have risen dramatically, reaching over 25% overall, with youth unemployment approaching 50%. Competition for jobs, housing, and public services has created tensions in communities that were already struggling with economic challenges, while government debt has climbed to over 100% of GDP. The refugee situation has also highlighted Jordan's fundamental resource constraints, particularly regarding water. Jordan ranks among the world's most water-scarce countries, with renewable water resources of less than 100 cubic meters per person annually, well below the international water poverty line. The sudden population increase has intensified pressure on already overstretched water supplies, forcing the government to implement strict rationing measures and accelerate investments in alternative sources like desalination and wastewater recycling. The paradox is stark. A country that receives less than 50 millimeters of annual rainfall in much of its territory has become home to hundreds of thousands of people fleeing conflict elsewhere. Jordan's economic challenges extend beyond the refugee crisis to structural issues that predate the Syrian conflict. The economy remains heavily dependent on foreign aid, remittances from Jordanians working abroad, and a service sector dominated by tourism and government employment. Manufacturing and agriculture account for relatively small portions of GDP, limiting opportunities for the kind of job creation needed to absorb a rapidly growing young population. The COVID-19 pandemic dealt another serious blow to tourism revenues, which traditionally provided crucial foreign currency earnings and employment opportunities. Despite these challenges, Jordan has made remarkable progress in some areas. The kingdom has become a regional leader in renewable energy development, capitalizing on abundant solar resources to reduce dependence on energy imports. Large-scale solar projects and wind farms now contribute significantly to the national electricity grid, with ambitious plans to become a net energy exporter within the next decade. This transition represents both economic opportunity and environmental responsibility, positioning Jordan as a model for sustainable development in arid regions. The kingdom's commitment to green technology has attracted international investment and created new industries around solar panel manufacturing, energy storage systems, and environmental consulting services that export Jordanian expertise throughout the region. Jordan's education system, while strained by the refugee influx, continues to perform relatively well compared to regional averages. The kingdom has invested heavily in expanding access to primary education and has made significant strides in female literacy and participation in higher education. Jordanian universities attract students from across the Arab world, and the country has developed strengths in information technology, medical education, and engineering that support both domestic development and knowledge exports to neighbouring countries. The tourism industry, despite periodic setbacks due to regional instability, remains one of Jordan's greatest economic assets. Petra alone attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, while other sites like Jerash, Wadi and the Dead Sea contribute to a diverse tourism portfolio that generates billions in revenue and supports hundreds of thousands of jobs. The challenge has been developing sustainable tourism strategies that preserve archaeological sites while maximizing economic benefits and ensuring that tourism revenues reach local communities rather than only international hotel chains. Jordan's role in regional diplomacy has become even more complex with the emergence of new security challenges. The rise of ISIS created security threats along Jordan's borders with both Syria and Iraq, forcing the kingdom to invest heavily in border security and participate in international counter-terrorism efforts. The kingdom has also had to navigate the complex geopolitics surrounding Iran's regional influence, balancing relationships with both the United States and regional powers while maintaining its traditional position of neutrality and moderation. The recent Abraham Accords, which established diplomatic relations between Israel and several Arab countries including the UAE, Bahrain and Morocco, have created new diplomatic possibilities while also presenting Jordan with strategic challenges. While Jordan welcomes regional progress toward peace, the kingdom must ensure that its own historic peace treaty with Israel and its special role as guardian of Jerusalem's holy sites remain respected and relevant in this new regional configuration. Jordan's custodianship of Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, formalized in the 1994 peace treaty, represents both a religious honor and a diplomatic responsibility that connects the kingdom to Muslims and Christians worldwide. This unique role requires delicate balancing as regional dynamics continue to evolve and new players emerge in Middle Eastern diplomacy. Women's rights represent an area where Jordan has made significant progress while still facing substantial challenges. Female literacy rates have increased dramatically, and women now represent a majority of university students. However, female labour force participation remains low at only about 15%, reflecting cultural attitudes and structural barriers that limit economic opportunities for half the population. Recent legal reforms have addressed issues like honour crimes and passport restrictions, but achieving full gender equality remains an ongoing process. Looking toward the future, Jordan faces both significant challenges and promising opportunities. The government's Economic Modernization Vision 2033 represents an ambitious attempt to diversify the economy, attract foreign investment, and create employment opportunities for the kingdom's young population. Priority areas include expanding renewable energy production, developing information technology industries, enhancing agricultural productivity through precision farming techniques, and positioning Jordan as a regional hub for logistics and financial services. The plan also emphasizes developing Jordan's pharmaceutical industry, which has already established the kingdom as a major producer of generic drugs for Middle Eastern and African markets. Special economic zones near Queen Alia International Airport aim to create integrated logistics platforms that leverage Jordan's strategic location between Europe, Asia, and Africa for 21st century trade networks. Water security will likely remain Jordan's most critical long-term challenge. Climate change predictions suggest that the region may become even more arid in coming decades, while population growth continues to increase demand. The kingdom has invested in innovative approaches including the Red Sea-Dead Sea project, advanced desalination technologies, and comprehensive water recycling systems, but achieving true water security will require continued innovation and regional cooperation. Jordan's unique position as a modern constitutional monarchy in a region marked by political volatility offers both advantages and responsibilities. The Hashemite royal family's legitimacy, derived from its religious heritage and track record of stability, provides continuity in an uncertain regional environment. However, this stability depends on the government's ability to deliver economic opportunities and maintain social cohesion while managing external pressures and internal reforms. The preservation of Jordan's extraordinary cultural heritage adds another dimension to contemporary challenges. Sites like Petra and Jerash face ongoing threats from tourism pressure, climate change, and urbanization, requiring sophisticated management strategies that balance conservation with economic development. The kingdom has invested in archaeological research, site management, and heritage tourism development, but protecting these irreplaceable treasures for future generations remains an ongoing responsibility. Digital documentation projects now create three-dimensional records of monuments and artifacts, while innovative conservation techniques address the effects of erosion, salt damage, and structural stress. Educational programs in local communities help ensure that heritage preservation becomes a shared priority rather than just a government concern, creating employment opportunities in guiding, restoration work, and traditional crafts that connect contemporary Jordanians to their ancestral skills and knowledge. Perhaps most remarkably, Jordan continues to demonstrate the same adaptability that has characterized its survival throughout history. From Nabataean merchants managing desert trade routes to modern diplomats navigating regional conflicts, from ancient engineers developing water systems to contemporary planners designing renewable energy networks, the essential challenge remains the same: maximizing limited resources through creativity, cooperation, and careful planning while maintaining cultural identity and social stability. As our journey through Jordan's history and geography concludes, what emerges is a portrait of a nation that exemplifies both the possibilities and challenges of our interconnected world. Jordan shows how small countries can exercise influence far beyond their size through skillful diplomacy, cultural preservation, and commitment to human dignity. It demonstrates how traditional societies can embrace modernity while maintaining their essential character, and how the lessons of history remain relevant for addressing contemporary challenges. The story of Jordan is ultimately a story of human resilience and adaptation, of communities that have thrived in challenging environments by remaining flexible, creative, and committed to cooperation across cultural and religious boundaries. From the Nabataean merchants who built Petra to the contemporary refugees who have found sanctuary in Jordanian communities, from the Roman engineers who constructed Jerash to the modern planners designing sustainable cities, this land continues to attract people seeking opportunity, safety, and the chance to contribute to something larger than themselves. In an era when many regions struggle with division and conflict, Jordan's example of stability, tolerance, and pragmatic idealism offers valuable lessons about building societies that honour both tradition and progress, serving the needs of their own people while contributing to the broader human community.